Hi, I'm Ganesh Kumar. I'll just provide a basic overview on service-oriented architecture. Let's start with the definition. Service-oriented architecture is a style of software design where services are provided to other components through a communication protocol. And what is a service? A service is a component capable of performing a specific task. Following are some of the properties of SOA. A service logically represents a business activity with a specified outcome. A service is self-contained, that is, it does not depend on other piece of software to work. It is a black box for its consumers. That means when we use a service, it is not necessary to understand the architecture of the system. And a service may consist of other underlying services. Let's take an example from IT. Imagine I want to build a web application that allows people to pay their parking tickets online. Well, I can spend years developing a subsystem that functions as a street map and another subsystem for dealing with payments and yet another subsystem for login, user authentication, and so on. Or I can simply make use of Google's Map service, a payment gateway service from PayPal, and user login service from Facebook. My job then would be to integrate these diverse services by creating some common process that guides the user to deliver the desired functionality. Thus, instead of building a system that was based around my internal components, my new application would instead be built with an architecture that is oriented around services. This is called service-oriented architecture. So when it comes to a customer paying via credit card, they simply swipe their card and put their PIN number. No one in the shop understands how the transaction is actually completed. Only the financial service provider has that information. For the rest of us, it is completely abstracted away through encapsulation. But the financial providers have complete control over the logic of the system. This is called service autonomy. Although we have a multicultural team of staffs in an office, there is an agreement that every person should speak in English when interacting with other staffs or customers. Similarly, services adhere to the communication agreement as defined collectively by one or more service description documents. This is called standardized service contract.
Hi, I'm Balachandra. Let's talk about the principles of service-oriented architecture. First principle is the standardized service contract, and what it says is that services within the same service inventory should be in compliance with the same contract design standards. What it does preaches is that a contract first approach to service delivery, whereby contracts are custom developed like according to certain common design standards that could apply to all services within a given service inventory. And the next principle is a service loose coupling, and what it says is that services should always impose a lower consumer coupling requirements, and thereby they themselves could be decoupled from their surrounding environment, let's say the surrounding services. And the next principle is a service abstraction. What it says is that a service contract should contain only essential information about what it is limited to be doing. For example, it should avoid saying like what it is composed of or what are its dependencies. And next principle is the service reusability. And whenever you develop a service, that service should be like implementing an individual body of logic, so that any service consumer can have only one access point to any given body of logic, and that's what it tries to say. And next principle is the service autonomy. So the services should always exercise a higher level of control over its underlying runtime execution environment, and thereby reducing shared access to service resources and increasing physical isolation can actually raise as a service ability to function autonomously. The next principle is service statelessness. State data management consumes actually a lot of system resources and can result in a significant resource burden when multiple instances of the same services are invoked concurrently. And the next principle is the service discoverability. And so whenever you implement a service, it should be discoverable by the consumers, right? So this could be achieved by having a service registry which could contain metadata information about a service and a pointer to where the service is actually located. So thereby a service consumer can go to a service registry to get the appropriate service for what it is expecting. And the next principle is the service composability. And services should be effective composition participants, and thereby, so this requires an effective means of decomposing a solution logic and repeatedly recomposing so that we can solve some new problem.
Hi, this is Chanji Ramurthy, and today we are going to talk about topics such as implementation approaches of SOA and economics of SOA. Okay, moving on to implementation approaches. SOA, service oriented architecture, can be done implementing with web services. This is done by building an SOA using web services standards. One such example is SOAP, Simple Object Application Protocol, which we better known as SOAP. Yeah, of course. However, SOA can also be implemented with other service-based technologies such as REST, Corba, Genie, etc. Implementation can be done with one or more protocols in a hybrid fashion, of course. The key is to have independent services with defined interfaces that can be performed in a standard way without a service having a foreknowledge of calling applications. These Thus, SOA enables the development of applications that are built by combining loosely coupled and highly interoperable services. These services interoperate based on formal definition, that is WSDL, which is Web Script Definition Language. It is independent of the underlying platform or programming languages. Thus, it hides the implementation of language specific services. Economics of SOA. Yeah, moving to the next slide. We are talking about economics of SOA. While implementing SOA, every business model has to consider the return of investment for implementing their service-oriented architecture based on their existing legacy services. So, return of investment is the most challenging factor for any business organization. Few, few does provide proofs of return of investment in the form of paybacks, but so far there is no single model has been developed for calculating the return of investment for an SOA implementation. It is due to the fact because SOA implementation can be realized at the different stages of the application transformation. The picture here depicts the return of investment while implementing a service-oriented architecture for existing legacy applications.
Hi, this is Mohan, and I'm going to talk about REST API. So let's start with an overview of REST API. API stands for Application Programming Interface, which means a piece of software talking to each other. And REST over here denotes as Representational State Transfer. So basically, it's a client-server interaction mechanism which uses HTTP for data communication. And there are only 4 operations which it can perform, which is get, put, post, and delete. So let's start with the principle of REST. So the architecture principle of REST states that RESTful services are stateless, which means a request from client to server should contain all necessary information for the server to respond for. And RESTful services have a uniform discipline interface, which in this case is HTTP. And REST-based architectures are built from resources. Resources are nothing but a piece of information which you type in. In this case, for example, maps.googleapi.com is the server which you are trying to access, and maps, API, geocode, and JSON are the resources which the client is asking for. If you type in this in your URL, you will get the exact geographical longitude and latitude of Chicago. Next, REST components manipulate resources by exchanging representation of the resources. That is, you could manipulate the state of any resources using post method, which is one of the operations of HTTP. Next is nothing but REST API architecture. If you just see the diagram, you could see that Android app, iPhone app, and browser here is referenced as a client, which will request a certain data to the server, which is going through HTTP protocol, and in return the server replies to the client using JSON or XML format. So I have explained here the entire process using a user management. So here user service slash users is nothing but an HTTP, and using get command will give us the list of users, and using put command you could insert a new user with the ID 2, and using post command, you could update the existing resource of with ID 2, and with delete command, you could delete the user with ID 1.
Hello everyone, I am Abhishek Kumar and I will be explaining the concept of SOAP. SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. As the name suggests, it is a protocol used for message exchange in the form of XML between the internet devices. So any web service that follows the guidelines laid down by SOAP Web Services specification is called a SOAP Web Service. A basic SOAP service consists of SOAP, WSTL and UDDI. Figure 1 encapsulates the idea of a SOAP service. We can see the service consumer and the service provider interacting using a SOAP web service. Also, WSTL and UDDI are used, about which we will discuss in the coming slides. Service consumer and service provider need to have a common format to exchange message or any information, and XML is used for the same. And also, it cannot be a simple XML document. The SOAP XML message needs to have a defined structure. The SOAP message consists of a particular structure which is made up of envelope, header and body. So the SOAP message has an envelope which is the root element. Inside the envelope we can have header. Header is optional and it gives us information about the message such as the complex types, and it can have authentication parameters as well. Body contains the actual data of the request meant to be sent over to the server. The Web Service Definition Language (WSDL) is a standard for service interface definition. It sets out how the service operations, operation names, parameter and their types, and service binding should be defined. In a web service scenario, the service consumer needs to know what are the services available, what are the request and response parameter, how to call a web service. To meet these needs, every service provider publishes an interface for his web services that describes all attributes of the web service. This is XML based interface called WSDL used to describe the functionalities of the web service. This helps in generating the required request and response XML formats required for communicating over a web service. UDDI stands for Universal Description, Discovery and Integration, and it is an XML based standard for publishing and finding the web services. The service provider publishes his web service through WSDL on an online directory from where consumers can query and search the web services. This online registry directory is called UDDI. To summarize, SOAP is an XML based protocol to exchange messages between a requester and a provider of a web service. The provider publishes the WSDL to UDDI and the requester can join it using SOAP. Thank you.
Hi, this is Dilip and let's talk about the comparison between REST and SOAP. Other than the reason that these two are used to implement web services, it's a bit strange to compare them, and that's why the question mark in the title. The reason for this is that while SOAP is a protocol just like HTTP, REST is an architectural style that can use any protocol just like REST or HTTP. REST is relaxed about rules, whereas SOAP is a bit standardized. For example, REST imports security measures from other transport, but SOAP uses its own set of strict security specification. Also, REST as an architecture has freedom to use many data formats like JSON, HTML, plain text, but SOAP can only use XML. To simplify, consider REST to be a horse which has freedom to carry a man without any extra burden, and SOAP to be a horse locked to a chariot where man has good security but with extra weight and complexity. Let's look at the business and sector where service-oriented architecture is being used. By the approach of service-oriented architecture, small-scale companies started running their entire business from the cloud. One such company is M. which processes digital coupons. Clayton Homes, a home builder, was able to tighten up the operations and increase its efficiency by adopting a service-oriented process. US Coast Guard system used service-oriented architecture services to track any incoming ships towards US waters and also to keep track of the assets of the Coast Guard. Centerpoint Energy, an electric and oil utility, identified the needs of service-oriented approaches in building its smart grid initiative. To wrap up, service-oriented architecture was used to make businesses flexible and agile. Service-oriented architecture makes use of reusable, loosely coupled software components to implement web services. Principle of SOA, along with the REST and SOAP mechanisms, help in communication between services. Service-oriented architecture has helped multiple businesses run successfully and is slowly getting ubiquitous. Thank you.